Go Chiefs. Yeah, I know. Can I start again? Just yeah, go Donkeys. All right. Well, it's really, these are great, and you have no idea how much we professors love and appreciate you taking time to come out. It just shows your hunger, your values, and our heart is to help you. By the time we're finished, that you'll get something to strengthen you and that you can share with a child that's leaving the faith or what have you. The last 3.5 years, I've gone through a number of life-threatening diseases. I have an extremely rare cancer that almost nobody's ever heard of. I've had surgery for that. I had prostate cancer and then it returned. I had surgery, that is, and it returned. I had a very serious colon cancer that had 31 lymph nodes involved in it. I've had 8 surgeries, 2 rounds of radiation and chemo, and I have been filled with joy and peace the whole time. That's the honest truth. And you can ask my wife why that's true. But one of the reasons is that I know beyond any reasonable doubt that life after death and heaven and hell are real. I know that. It's not a belief I have. It's something I actually know to be true. Now, I know it to be true because as a 70-year-old man who now celebrates this month my 50th year as a Jesus follower, I have placed my confidence based on good reasons in the Bible, and it's never let me down. I've been angry at God. He's been a no-show a number of times. We've all experienced that. But the Bible has been faithful and reliable, and I believe that when it teaches me that after I die, I will go immediately in a disembodied form into an intermediate state in the presence of God and others, and I will await the resurrection of my body when everyone is raised at the final day. So I know that's true. I also know life after death is real because of the historical evidence for the reliability of the New Testament documents, which you'll hear about if you attend Professor Williams' seminar, and the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. If it is highly reasonable to believe in the resurrection, as I take it to be, then I have strong evidence that there's life after death and that I will never die. And as Dallas Willard once said, most of us probably won't know we're dead because after you die, many people aren't aware they're dead. They just leave their bodies and they don't know that that's their body laying there. Well, the third reason that I think provides confirming evidence for life after death is the overwhelming evidence from near-death experiences. I want to begin by sharing some cases with you. Then I'll give you just some statistics about near-death experiences. I'll give you evidences for why I think they're actually true and real, 95% of them. Then I will handle some atheistic objections to them, and finally, some biblical objections that have been raised against near-death experiences. Let me give you some cases. This case was published in the American Journal of Diseases of Children by the well-known pediatrician Melvin Morse, who practices medical research at a major hospital in the Seattle area in Washington. On one occasion, there was a 7-year-old girl named Katie who was found dead at the bottom of a YMCA swimming pool. She was on the bottom, face down, dead. They pulled her out. They got an ambulance. They made attempts to resuscitate her in the ambulance to absolutely no avail. Finally, they were able to get her to the emergency room, And after a certain amount of work, they were able to get a brain wave, and they had an artificial machine pumping her lungs, but she still had no gag reflex. She had massive brain swelling. She was deeply, deeply comatose, totally unconscious, and she had a 10% of recovery. 3 days later, she recovered fully. And Morse interviewed her about what happened when she was in the pool, because he wanted to know if she died from something else that needed fixing. And she said, "Oh, do you mean when I met Jesus?" And he was not at that point a believer, and he said, "Well, that'd be an interesting place to start." and so she shares that at the bottom of the pool, Jesus came to her and said, "This is going to be all right. This is not your time. You're going to have to come back." And at that moment, an angel who identified herself as Elizabeth, God often speaks to us in language that comforts us, and she felt herself leaving her body and was taken by Elizabeth to her home, which was miles away. And she saw in her home her brother playing in his room with a G.I. Joe truck. She saw her sister, who was singing a specific rock song that she identified, who was combing her Barbie doll hair. She saw her mother, and said she was cooking chicken and rice, and her father was in the living room laying back, just staring into empty space, and she identified the clothing that all of her family members had on. And they were there, and they were shocked to hear this, because every detail that she shared was completely 100% accurate and true. And she, when she was taken through a tunnel to heaven, it was as she met the Lord Jesus, and it was reiterated to her. She was, by the way, believed in Jesus, that it was not her time, and she came back into her body. Let me give you another case that was published by the Dutch cardiologist, a highly respected cardiologist, Pim van Lommel, in the highly prestigious secular medical journal, the Lancelot. A 44-year-old man was brought to a Dutch hospital, and the city is named, I can't pronounce it. I tried to wear wooden shoes to see if that would help. It didn't. But he had been found, he had a massive heart attack. He was found completely unconscious and stone cold in a park. And he was clinically dead. And in the ambulance that brought him to the hospital, there was an attempt to resuscitate him, and it was a complete failure. When he got to the emergency room at the hospital, half of his lower body had already turned black and blue, and there was evidence of blood pooling throughout his body, which happens only to corpses. And his lips and his fingernails had turned blue, and there was no blood circulating in his body, and he had no brainwave. He was dead. They put him on a ventilator and sought to bring him back. There was a doctor and two nurses in the room, and they were finally able to get him to have a heartbeat, but he was in a coma for 7 days. But during the time when they were resuscitating him, one of the nurses saw that he had dentures in his mouth, which is very dangerous, took them out, and he was enclosed by a screen, but there was a cart on the other side of the screen that had 3 shelves. One was a pull-out shelf. Put his dentures in the pull-out shelf of this movable cart, and moved the cart away, and then he was comatose. 7 days later, he woke up, and the nurse that happened to put his dentures in there was on duty at that time when he woke up. And he wakes up, and he looks at her and says, "Hey, I know you. You're the one who took my dentures out, and I want them back." He was a crusty old dude. And she had forgotten about the dentures. And she remembered it, and he said, "You put them in the third drawer of that cart, that sliding cart thing, and I want you to get them out and bring them back to me." And she said, "How did you know that?" And he said, "I left my body. First of all, I was standing next to my body, and I didn't know I was dead. And I looked next, and there was a body, and I thought, why are you, cheap hospital, you got 2 people in a small bed like that? What is that?" No, he really did. And then he realized it was his own body, and he floated up to the ceiling and watched the whole thing happen, and was able to describe in detail what the doctors did and the nurses and where they put his dentures. And it was verified, and this is in his medical records. I'll give you one final one. I've read 400 of these. My sister-in-law, Beverly, who lives in Florida, as a dear believer, married to a Jewish gentleman who's not a believer. She went to Neiman Marcup's, and she was buying something, and the checkout gentleman was obvious to her he was Jewish. But there was a picture of Jesus behind the checkout counter. And so she said to him, "Sir, I don't mean to be nosy. I'm married to a Jewish man." And she said, "Are you Jewish?" He said, I am." And she said, "Well, you have a picture of Jesus there. Do you mind telling me why?" And he said, "Yes." She said, 3 years ago, I died. And I was dead for about 30 minutes, and I went to heaven, and I met Jesus. And he said, "You have been rejecting me your whole life. I am the Son of God who died to save you, and I'm your Messiah, and I want you believe in me and start following me." And I said, "I woke up, and I've been a Jesus Messianic Jew ever since." Now, that was just a random thing in Neiman Marcup's. So these are not rare. The statistics 5 years ago were that 4% of the German population and of the U.S. population, 1 out of 25 Americans, has had a near-death. They should be called after-death experiences because people are dead. And I'll just continue to near-death. There have been about 12 million Americans that are living now that have had these experiences in the last few years, and there are 200 to 300 million at least worldwide, according to research and the statistics. Most of the researchers have PhDs or MD degrees and were skeptics before they began to research this, and they've all become believers in near-death experiences. Many have converted to Christianity. There are over 1,000 journal articles published on these. We can trace near-death, after-death experiences back to ancient Egypt. One of the early popes gathered a large number of near-death stories from people around Rome that he compiled and used as an apologetic for Christianity to those who did not believe. And so these things have been happening since recorded history. There's just more of them that have happened today. So now, these are not just some guy in the mountains of the Ozarks who's got a mimeograph machine cranking out near-death stories. Okay, these are widely present. They've been extremely scrutinized and researched. And believe them or not believe in them, there can be no doubt of the quality of the research that's been done on these. Now, what I want to do is to give you some of the reasons why I believe they're true, and then we'll consider some of the objections. So what I've done is given you some cases, given you some statistics to give you the sense that these have been researched by very, very qualified people, and that these are numerous in number. Here are 6 reasons that I think that that the vast majority of these are real and are true. First of all, they are widespread, frequent, and atheists and little children down to 3 years of age have had these experiences and reported what they saw without being culturally indoctrinated. So these experiences have happened to all kinds of people. There is a commonality to what they experience, as I'll talk about that later. Numerous little children are able to describe Jesus and angels and have never been taught about that. When they come back, I won't go into that, but there's a significant number of these people, and they're not all expecting heaven. Some of them were, as I said, atheists or little children. Number 2 is the strongest piece of evidence, and this is that there is objective, verified, corroborative evidence that shows that these were true. This means we don't just have to take the person's word for it, because there were things they saw that were verified by eyewitnesses and the doctors and medical researchers that are many times in the medical records that could not have just been made up or something of that sort. There are medical facts, for example, and I'll describe some of these later, but some people can give detailed descriptions of what the doctors did to them, how many were in the room, how many of them were women. The Vicky girl that I told you about, when Dr. Morse came in to talk to her, she said, "Oh, that's the one with the beard." And she said there was a taller doctor that was with him. And they both came in, and they did stuff on me, and then they wheeled me into a small room in this machine and took pictures of me, and it was all true. So they're able to see medical facts that happened, doctors, and the things that they could not have seen or heard because their brains were dead and they were not able to be conscious. There were other facts that they were able to know, like what was going on in the floor above where they were dead. One guy said, I died, I met Jesus, he and I went through the ceiling up to the 2nd floor, and she said, I saw this central area where there were these nurses on computers. There were about 6 or 7 of them, and all the beds around them had mannequins in it with machines on them. And the doctor who heard that practically dropped trowel, because the floor above where this guy was in the intensive care unit was a practice floor for nurses to learn how to administer different things to mannequins. And there were mannequins in all the rooms, and these were nurses in nursing school learning their craft. And only that floor had that. And he was completely accurate, and this has been verified. The doctors' names are given, and we know the people who were eyewitnesses of that. Sometimes people meet people that are dead, and that other people did not know were dead. One little boy who died in a swimming pool and was resuscitated, about 6 years old. There was a crowd around him, and his mom and dad were there, and he was resuscitated, and they said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah, but I didn't know I had a brother." And the parents got pale looking and said, "What do you mean?" I met my brother on the other side, and he said that when he was in your tummy, you had him sucked out. And he had been aborted, and they got a divorce because there were people watching, and they were so embarrassed, they divorced one another as a result of that. I could tell you numerous examples of this kind of thing, of meeting people. In one case, this one woman said that she had met her uncle in heaven, and the family was in the waiting room. They had just called him that morning. He was doing fine, lived in another state. Nobody believed her, and she wouldn't let the doctor touch her until they called. And they called, and somebody was at his house saying, Uncle George died 3 hours ago. And she met him in heaven, and nobody knew he was dead, including her. So these are kind of hard to explain away, to tell you the truth. The next piece of evidence is the enhanced consciousness when the brain is completely dead. Eben Alexander, and I don't agree with some of the interpretations he gave to his experience, though they were largely theistic and even had Christian elements in them. But he was brain dead. He's a Harvard neurosurgeon practicing in a major hospital, I believe in Boston. When he when he died, his friends monitored his brain for a week and kept him so that if he revived, he did. And he described a whole ton of things that happened, a couple of which were verifiable by external evidence. And he was brain dead. All the doctors will tell you there was no possibility of consciousness, but yet he was fully conscious. The next line of evidence is, by the way, not only are they conscious, but their consciousness is enhanced. Regularly, there's the statement, I was more alive and aware of what was going on than when I was in my body in this earth. And there is enhanced sensation and awareness. 5, the deaf who were born deaf hear. People who were born blind see for the first time, and when they come back into their bodies, they're not able to see again. There's a book called Mindsight that studied 25 documented cases. They are both medical, and one's a medical doctor, the other has a PhD in medical research at the University of Connecticut Medical Center, and they were the researchers who did the research on this. And they interviewed people who were born with their optic nerves fried. They never saw a single thing in their life, but when they died, they were taken often by the Lord Jesus, and they were able to see their playground where they were taken by, they walked to. They were able to see spots on their roommates' faces that they couldn't feel. They had no words for color. They could only say light or dark, but they were able to describe things accurately in terms of geometrical shapes and locations of things that they could not have known. And then when they came back, they lost their sight. 2 more. The first one is the oddness of the agape love theme. In every culture, people who come back are told to start giving unconditional love to the people they meet and serve them and love them unconditionally. Now, what's odd about that is that love is not the highest virtue in a number of cultures. In a Buddhist culture, the highest virtue is losing desire. In some cultures, it's honoring your ancestors. In other cultures, it's certain forms of success. if these were cultural projections, you would expect what they were told to do would be in line with the highest value of their culture, but that's not true. The New Testament theme of agape love is the one that is universally the one that they're told to come back with. And finally, there is incredible life change that cannot be duplicated by any other thing. These people, first of all, don't want to talk about it. They're embarrassed. They're depressed to be back. Many of them have depression for half a year or more because they don't like being back here. It was so nice back there. And they don't like talking about it because they're afraid people think they're crazy. But eventually, when they start talking about it, there have been longitudinal studies that have demonstrated that these people have never been the same. One guy named Storms, who was a professor of literature at Eastern Kentucky, I believe it was, and by his own admission, a stinking atheist who cared about nothing but himself. Not even his wife, he hated everybody. He died and went to hell. And it was a really bad experience. And he had never been, and I don't have time to go into it, but the dude didn't know what to do, but he remembered, God Bless America. So he started singing God Bless America. And finally, he remembered from a Sunday school class when he was a little child, Jesus loves me, this I know. That's all he remembered. And he began to pray out to Jesus to have mercy on him and to come and save him and help him. And Jesus came to him, and he was saved. He quit his job, went to seminary, and he's been a pastor ever since. Go on YouTube and look up the guy's an interesting dude. It changed his life entirely, and he's now been a pastor of a church for these many years. All right, these are the reasons why I think that these are largely veridical and true, especially the external corroboration. Let me give you some naturalistic objections to them, and then I'll close with some biblical objections. One objection is that what people are doing is merely reporting what they've seen on hospital emergency room television shows. And so what they're doing is reporting information about what it's like when we see people resuscitated in the hospital. So Melvin Morse, who is Professor Sabon, who is a cardiologist, did a study where he had a control group of about 25 people who died and were resuscitated, but did not claim to have near-death experiences. And they were asked to try to make up what they thought they might have experienced, and they were all like TV. Not a single one of them got a single detail right about what really happened. That was compared with a group of 23 patients who had the same thing happen, and they had all expressed that they had near-death experiences. All 23 of them got 80 to 90% of the facts that happened right, even though they're radically different than what happens on television. And he said one person described every step in such accurate detail that he could literally use his video description to train physicians about how resuscitation works. So that's hardly, and this is documented, that's hardly projection. In addition to that, a lot of patients are little children who haven't had a chance to watch TV. And they describe what was happening from a vantage point up on the ceiling about what the doctors did to them, and their descriptions are accurate. Now, some will say that NDEs are merely the same sort of thing, a dream projection of some kind, and that's the people are just sort of projecting their religious beliefs, and that's what they're doing. The problem is that atheists have these, Little children have them that don't have religious beliefs yet. They also, many of these experiences people have experiences that don't conform to their religious expectations. This is especially true of those in Buddhist and Hindu and Muslim countries who have these experiences. I'll have a little bit more to say about that in just a minute. And so, because of time, that's all I can say, but I think that is enough to rebut the claim that these are just a projection of people's religious experiences. Plus, this doesn't explain how they knew facts that were verified independent of the NDE. That's unexplained. Finally, this is the result of oxygen deprivation to the brain, or a lack of brain stimulation and that sort of thing. The problem is that these things have been studied entirely, and things like oxygen deprivation to the brain, when people regain oxygen, what they report is mental laziness. They have poor concentration and memory. They don't have vivid awareness of any kind. Their memories are fragmented. They don't fit into a coherent story. And there's no external corroboration by independent evidence. And so this cannot be explained by anything happening to the brain or central nervous system. Again, the real killer for all of this is the evidence that is corroborated by medical and other eyewitnesses that these people could not know if they were still in their bodies. I wish I had time to tell you a funny one, but I don't right now. Now, let me say about biblical. A lot of people are concerned because they don't think that this correlates with biblical teaching. The best book on this that will change your life, it's one of the top 10 books I've read in 50 years as a Christian, so that ought to mean something to you. Top 10 Christian books. I've read some good philosophical books I'd put maybe up there. It's called Imagine Heaven by John Burke. Imagine Heaven by John Burke. He answers, as a pastor and a solid evangelical pastor of a major church in Fort Worth, he answers almost all the problems people have that this doesn't comport with the Bible. And he says 95% of them across culture do, and there's about 5% that don't, and he thinks that those could be demonic or simply explained in some other way. The problem is that the Bible is very sketchy about the intermediate state. Remember, you die, there's an intermediate state where you leave your body and you're in a disembodied state with some kind of what is called ethereal body that's made out of light, and it shimmers and its boundaries aren't precise. It's not a physical body, and there's an ability to have sense perception and things of that sort. So the Bible is just sketchy about the intermediate state. Hebrews says it's appointed to man once to die and then comes the judgment. I think in the context, the important point was that we're all going to face judgment. God can override that anytime he wants to. He did, if we treat that literally, because Jesus rose Lazarus from the dead. That poor guy didn't die, and after that came the judgment. He got a second chance. And so God, if he wants to, in the scriptures, and I don't know why today, couldn't make exceptions to that anytime he wants to. So even if that means what many think it means, it could be a generalization for which God has the right to override if he thinks it's in the best interests of the greatest number of people down the long hall. I personally think that that's talking about, and this may be cheating, but it's about final irreversible death, and that these are cases where people die, but it's not irreversible. And I do think that there will come a time when there will be a final death and that's it. I don't consider these to fit the Hebrew passage. I consider these to be more cases of death that is reversible and is reversed. It is not when you get to the point where nothing more can be done to bring you back. And after that comes the judgment. Some people are upset that not everybody sees Jesus. Well, Burke points out that in the Old Testament, God appeared to people in many occasions and did not let them know who he was. They just knew that this was a sacred divine being, but he did not declare his identity as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the God of Moses. And so it is biblical for God to make himself manifest to someone without going all the way and letting them know who he is. And I leave it to him as to why he does that, but I know that he would do it if it was the best thing for the person, to give them a little bit of truth and not too much to overwhelm them. And I believe that's what happened in the Old Testament. So this is biblical. Some people are upset that when people have a life review, there's not judgment. Now, number one, in the life review, people are shown the things they did and how other people responded, and there's a lot of sadness there, but there's compassion. What Burke points out is there are two judgments in the Bible. There is a Bema Seat judgment. When we die, at some point we will go to that judgment, and it will be for rewards, where our works will be evaluated as wood, hay, and stubble, or we will be rewarded. The next judgment is the great white throne judgment at the end of the age, where all people will be judged for their final heaven and hell. And Burke says this is neither of those. This is not mentioned in the Bible. This is something entirely different, and it's neither of those judgments. Now, finally, and this is the last point, then I think I have time for a story. The experiences cross-culturally of millions of people are overwhelmingly similar. Overwhelmingly. The interpretation placed on the experiences sometimes varies culturally. Example, two European researchers, Osis and Haraldson, studied the near-death experiences of 500 Americans and 500 Hindus from India to see if there was cultural relativity to their experiences. Now, what was interesting is that most of them, even a large percentage of the Hindus, saw a radiant white man, a man in a white robe radiating light with a book of judgment that they clearly took to be an assessment of their deeds, and that he was a sacred person. And this was seen both in America and in Hindu culture. But what the person was described as was Jesus, God, an angel, Krishna, Shiva, or Devus. And here's what's interesting about this. Krishna has blue skin in Hindu thinking. Shiva has 3 eyes. And the point is that what they saw did not comport with an impression of their gods. They saw